All right, team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Matt Hamilton. Delighted to have your company with me once again. If you're a returning listener, or maybe you are someone who's tuning into the show for the very first time. And if that is the case, thank you so much for joining us and a warm welcome to you. Today, we're going to be discussing the topic of what is essentially, in a nutshell, imposter syndrome, but specifically in the context of stepping out of your predecessor's shadow and how best to do that. Now, if you've had any experience in leadership, you will most likely have been through this or something very similar to it before, and it is indeed something that is quite common. As we always do, we're going to go back into some recent history to help inform the conversation today. And we're going to do that by examining the story of a lady called Sheryl Sandberg. And we're going to have a look at her journey through imposter syndrome with one of the biggest companies in the world. Let's go. When Sheryl Sandberg first received the offer to become the Chief Operating Officer of Facebook, she couldn't believe it. Here was a position at one of the world's most exciting tech companies, a role that many would dream of. But instead of feeling elated, she was overwhelmed by self-doubt. She asked herself questions like, why me? Am I really ready for this? Despite her impressive resume, having worked as Chief of Staff for the US Treasury Secretary and later leading the growth of Google's online advertising business, Sheryl couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't qualified for such a high-level role. The fear began to creep in. What if everyone at Facebook eventually realized that she didn't belong there? She sat in her office reviewing the offer letter, and her mind swirled with insecurities. Everyone around me is so much more technical, she thought. I didn't come from an engineering background like so many of the other leaders in Silicon Valley. She was sure that they would soon figure out that her success had been a fluke, that she wasn't as smart or as capable as everybody had thought she was. So for days, Sheryl hesitated, and it wasn't just the newness of the role or the weight of the responsibility that bothered her. It was the gnawing feeling deep inside her that no matter how much she had achieved in the past, she was still an imposter. But Sheryl wasn't the kind of person to let fear dictate her choices. After days of contemplation, she finally accepted the position, but made a pact with herself. She wouldn't let this overwhelming doubt define her leadership journey. Instead, she decided to confront her feelings head on. And that began with recognizing her value. Once Sheryl had officially stepped into the role, things didn't get any easier. In fact, the imposter syndrome still lingered. But one day, as she sat down to write out a strategic plan for the company, she had a realization, and that was that she was there for a reason. She recognized that the skills she had honed over the years in business strategy, operations, and leadership were invaluable. She didn't need to be an engineer to be effective. What she brought to the table was just as important as anybody else's technical expertise, and that was her unique strength. She started to see that the challenges ahead weren't just about proving her worth to others, but actually they were about leveraging her strengths to help Facebook grow. And with that, she began to feel the first stirrings of some confidence. Despite her progress, Sheryl knew that she still needed support, so she turned to one of the people who could help her the most, and that was Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's CEO. She reached out to Mark and began to openly discuss her struggles with him, and to her surprise, Mark was actually incredibly supportive. He reassured her that everybody, no matter how experienced, feels unsure at times, especially when they're in a new role. He reminded her that what mattered most wasn't being perfect, but being able to learn and adapt. Sheryl also sought guidance from other leaders, both inside and outside of Facebook. And the more she spoke to mentors and peers, the more she realized that imposter syndrome wasn't something unique to her. It was actually something that nearly every leader faced at some point in their career. This gave her comfort and allowed her to stop feeling isolated in her doubts. One of Sheryl's most powerful realizations was that vulnerability wasn't a weakness, it was in fact a strength. And instead of pretending to have all the answers, she began to admit when she didn't know something. During team meetings, she would openly share that she was still learning the ropes and that she didn't have every solution, but would figure out things together with the team. This honesty didn't undermine her authority. Rather, it built trust, and her team saw her as someone who was approachable, relatable, and willing to listen to them. And in return, they felt more comfortable offering feedback and contributing to her ideas with their own. It created a sense of collaboration that was actually invaluable to her leadership style. So in the months that passed, Cheryl grew more comfortable in her role. She accepted that mistakes were just a part of the journey, and she no longer feared them. Instead, she saw them as an opportunity for growth. Every setback taught her something new about herself and her leadership. When faced with a tough decision or a failed initiative, she would reflect, learn, and adjust. Each experience added to her confidence. She didn't need to have everything figured out all at once, but what mattered was her commitment to learning and improving. And that is an interesting excerpt for several reasons. Number one, it's a high-profile person who was very, very successful in times gone by before accepting that role. And it's with one of the biggest companies in the world. But what I liked about that excerpt was that it focused on values such as admitting when you don't have all the answers and involving your team members from a contribution perspective. And I think it's when we let go of that insecurity, when we let go of that need to impress, and establish authority as a leader. And instead you just put your hand up and say, guys, if you don't know, I don't know. And then allow the team to contribute accordingly. It's really powerful to have mastery of your ego and your insecurity in that way. And I think that's a great example of that. So let's talk about it. Imposter syndrome. Excuse me. Imposter syndrome. We've all most likely experienced it or some version of it. You may well ask yourself questions like, I will never be as good as my predecessor. And we have spoken about this on previous episodes of the podcast, where it's very, very difficult to come into a leadership role full of confidence if it is immediately apparent that your predecessor was much loved and someone who's going to be missed. You might even have people say as much to you, along the lines of, you've got big shoes to fill, or something of that nature. And you may worry accordingly that you're going to be compared to your predecessor, and you may wonder how you're going to stack up in comparison. You might even think to yourself, geez, this person has got so much love and respect. They're just someone that I cannot possibly be. I cannot be what they were. And it might eat away at you. But what I'd say to you is that it's always a mistake to try and mimic somebody else. If you're trying to be what somebody was, you're already starting off on the wrong foot. My advice to you is to not try and be like somebody else. Be your own thing. Bring your own style. You are you, and you will be you, bringing your own style to the table naturally. It won't seem forced, because it's not. At the end of the day, you need to understand that you need to bring your own style and leave your own mark with your leadership. You need to lead according to your values, not somebody else and their values. And the thing is, you'll never seem authentic if you're trying to mimic a predecessor. You need to be comfortable with the fact that, yeah, sure, people are going to compare me to a much-loved predecessor. That's natural, that's normal. But there's nothing I can do about it. I need to have faith and understand that if I bring my own style and I lead according to my values, which are hopefully good values, that as time passes, I will too win the respect of those that I lead. So bearing in mind you'll never seem authentic if you simply try to imitate your predecessor, I would encourage you not to try. So what are our actionable items from that observation? Well, I want to be careful to ensure that I'm not giving you the impression that you can't learn from a predecessor. Of course you can learn. You can look at what somebody did well and go, okay, that played well, or that aligns with my values, the way that they led or handled certain situations. Or perhaps you can look at their behaviours and go, interesting, people responded well to that. But where it gets treacherous is if you try and mimic their style, if you try and be what they were from a behavioural perspective, you will make your own impression on people. Your personality is yours and yours alone. So while it's great to be smart about it and internalise through observation and feedback what worked really well with the previous leader, sure, use it as a learning moment, but understand that you are going to have to apply those values in your own way, according to your own personality. So if something feels really super unnatural to you, maybe it's something that you need to consider more carefully as to A, whether you want to implement it, and B, if you decide you do, how you're going to do that. And is it authentic with respect to how you would normally go about things? So it'd be silly not to learn from others. We're going to identify those values, maybe those thoughts, those techniques, but we want to apply them in our way, and especially according to our values. Yeah, we spoke in previous episodes about the task that we have as leaders, which is to realise our vision. And I've harped on this concept a little bit, but it's interesting to combine the idea of vision and the realising of it, and then the topic of values. And because you're unique when you come into a new leadership role, and because you're different from the person that you're replacing, that's actually a strength. Yeah, and you will naturally bring a different spin to things without really even trying, simply just by being yourself, by virtue of the fact that you are inherently different. So if you are true to yourself, you will leave your mark. You will bring your own style. It won't feel difficult. It won't feel forced. What will feel difficult is doing the right thing at difficult times. So that might be a difficult conversation that needs to be had. Those things will always feel hard. And that's where that deep analysis on, do these actions that I'm taking align with my values? And do my values align with the strategic direction of the company? Are my values going to assist us in getting there? Does the company and the values exhibited by senior leadership in that company line up with my values? That's another interesting conversation. So there's an interesting parity here between personal brand. We could call it a brand. Your leadership and the personality that you exhibit at work is a brand. That's essentially what you are selling to the market. There's an interesting parity between coming second as a leader and trying to replace someone who was first, i.e. before you, and marketing. And the reality is that it always comes at a disadvantage to you. There's a great book called The 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And I don't recall the exact quote, so I'm going to paraphrase here because it's just come to mind. But the quote is along the lines of, essentially, it's always better to be first. It's better to be first in the mind of the consumer than second. And that even applies if you have a better product and you come second. Your marketing isn't about the quality of the product. It's about the psychology side of the product. And that applies to this situation where we're coming in to replace somebody. And even if we're better than they are, there will be this emotional connection and affinity on behalf of the followers towards that person that came first. You might be better in every single way, shape and form, but they will gravitate to what they know. And it's an interesting parity to observe that in marketing that is the case also. It's always better to be first. So the first step in solving a problem or addressing a problem is to understand it. So if we can go into these situations eyes wide open and know a couple of things. Number one, imposter syndrome, regardless apparently of your experience, is always something that we're going to face as humans. I get it. Someone who is a much accomplished businesswoman who's heading into Facebook for the first time as the COO, apparently she gets it. It's not like she wasn't experienced before that role. And I'm sure you can think of many experienced people who have spoken to you about this phenomenon in times gone by. So we know that it's a natural part of being human. And when we know that something is a natural part of being human, it means that we are aware we're probably going to face it at one time or another, or even on a repeated basis. It seems to be a core part of human psychology. And the beauty of understanding that something is going to occur ahead of time because it's in alignment with our nature, it means that we can prepare the best response to it and have our techniques ready to go for when the moment comes. And a big part of that is internalizing the understanding that with time it will pass. Internalizing the comfort that this is something everybody goes through. It's not just me. And if you're in a position where you've been elevated to a leadership position for the first time, well, you should take especially some comfort from this because of course you're going to feel that. If someone heading into Facebook as the COO after having a distinguished career outside of that organisation feels it, then of course you can be forgiven for experiencing it yourself. So with that in mind, what I want you to do, if you find yourself in that position, is I want you to zero in on what your style is. What does an authentic version of you look like? And are you presenting that to your new team? Or are you trying to be something that you're not? So I want you to be very, very clear on what your values are as a leader, how they align with the company's objectives or the organization's objectives, and how you're going to intertwine those two to drive your team to success. And of course, we've spoken about this concept before, but your strategy, your plan has to be very closely connected to the overarching strategy and goals of your senior management team, those above you. Everybody has to be pulling in the same direction as one cohesive team. So once you've identified what your values are, once you understand what good looks like, once you understand what your authentic self looks like, you're going to apply that. And to reiterate, of course you're going to have an open mind. Of course you're going to be open to observation and learning from those who have gone before you what worked, what people responded to, what values perhaps you don't have through unawareness that you might like to adopt from someone that you have admired and respected, or others have admired and respected in times gone by. We need to ensure that while we trust ourselves and back ourselves, we're not closed off to learning new things. That is the danger. There's a really fine line between having that confidence but not arrogance. We want to be somewhere in the middle. Yeah, we're confident in ourselves in this new leadership role, but we're not so arrogant to think that we can't be better. We're not so arrogant to think that we can't learn from other people. So make sure you have that learner's mindset. I think it's one of the keys to continuous improvement, and especially in a situation like this where you're coming into an organization and you're trying to fill some really big shoes. So with all that in mind, the take-home message is be yourself, understand what your values are and the foundation that you're going to build your approach on, because that's what they are. Your values are the foundation. And then go forward in collaboration with others and be confident about it. Don't try to imitate. Guys, thank you so much for joining me once again for another episode. I really do appreciate your continued support. As I always say at the end of every episode, if you're getting value from this show, hit that subscribe button for me. It really does make a big difference when I can see the subscriber count going up. It also helps the search engines distribute the podcast a little bit more readily. So very helpful to see that subscriber count going up. Please continue to do it if you get value from the show. If you're feeling really generous, leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast app you get the show on. I'll also direct your attention to the show notes. There is a link in there to the Instagram page if you'd like to consume some other content in the forms of reels and posts and things like that. And of course, the LinkedIn Community of Practice page, the Exceptional Leadership Community of Practice, where I've brought some of my contacts together on that page, and I'm inviting you to come and join us in that group so we can share content with each other and build some really good networks. Until next time, guys, thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you later.